YouTube, with the regular season coming to a close here very shortly, within a week or so, I think it's very important to start asking this question: will the Denver Nuggets repeat as NBA champions in 2024? We're going to talk about that in this video. Who's going to stop this team and who's going to stop the best player in the world, Nikola Jokic? Let's get right into it, folks. So like I said, with the playoffs shortly approaching, I think it's obvious that the Denver Nuggets are, if not the best team in the West, like they're neck and neck with maybe OKC if you think that, but I think they are much better than OKC. There is one problem I want to talk about for the Denver Nuggets that is seriously important for them in the playoffs. We'll get to that in a minute, but I do want to talk about the Western Conference and who I think is even a real threat to Denver in this year's postseason. I think there's a few teams you could mention, probably only 3 or 4 teams I'd say that could even really give Denver a great series and even maybe catch them off guard and take them out in the Western Conference playoffs. Those teams would be the Oklahoma City Thunder, with everyone fully healthy. The Thunder have really elevated themselves to a legit contender, and I don't think enough people are taking them seriously in the Western Conference because they're a new team. The second team I'd like to talk about is the Minnesota Timberwolves, because I mentioned this before in a different video, but I think if Karl Anthony Towns is healthy and ready to go by the time the playoffs roll around, I think they're maybe the best team to surpass Denver. I think they're the most playoff ready out of that group, and I think, like I said, if Cat's healthy and ready to go and at his close to 100%, I think Minnesota's going to give Denver some real issues in that regard. You have some sleeper teams like the Clippers, like some of these play-in teams. I think Phoenix, Dallas, and the Lakers could all give Denver issues, and maybe, just maybe, if everything goes right for them in a series with Denver, they could get a huge upset series win. I just really don't see that happening. If I'm being honest, those teams just aren't complete enough to win a series against someone like Denver, in my opinion. The one thing I think that will hold Denver back in the playoffs is going to be simply their depth. They have to run a super short rotation. The backup 5 for them is going to be a real issue, I think, in some of these series, and I think their core of players is going to have to play so many minutes and be taxed so heavily that I think it just could impact the long grind of the playoffs. By the time the Western Conference roll around, these guys are going to be really tired, and they're going to have to be all playing their best because there's not a lot of different players you could give the other team different looks with. So really, the Nuggets are going to be running a maybe 8 or 9 man rotation, and like I said, the core guys, it's going to be Jokic, Murray, Gordon, MPJ, and KCP. Basically the starting 5. They're going to have to play nearly 40 minutes a game, all 5 of those guys, and they're going to have to play their best because there's no, fail safe if one of those guys has a really poor shooting night or is just off their game in a series, in a slump. There's not a lot of guys you can move into the lineup on this roster that could even come close to providing the same value. So it's going to be tough for Denver. Their starting 5 is going to be so heavily taxed. Let's talk about that. So I talked about this earlier in the season. I think losing Bruce Brown, Thomas Bryant, Jeff Green, and players like that would be such a huge factor for Denver in this season. I thought at the deadline they'd make some moves to kind of replace those guys and get some really cheap utility guys for super low value, like maybe trade a 2nd round pick for a guy like Kyle Lowry or something like that, like someone that could just come in that would cost you very little, that could provide solid utility and versatility off that bench. They didn't really do that, so now you have guys like Christian Brown, who I really like as a player and I really like for that second unit, who does a really good job staying ready and consistent every single night to provide Denver with a good solid production from that second unit. But other than Christian Brown, you have Reggie Jackson, who has been really good this season. A lot of people question the deal they gave him, but for me personally, I think he's been better than I thought he would be as that backup point guard to lead that second unit. He's really spearheading that second unit, and it's worked out pretty well for Denver, I'd say, with the Reggie Jackson re-signing. Then you have guys like Peyton Watson, who is inconsistent from the 3-point line, which I think is going to affect his minutes on the floor. It's going to be a lot of times in the playoffs where teams are going to exploit that defensively, and while he's a really great defender and transition player, and he does a lot of good things, cuts to the basket, he's super athletic and can provide a lob threat and stuff like that, I just think he's going to get exposed on offense for not being able to knock down consistent threes. Maybe I'm wrong, we'll see, but I think that's a real possibility. So it's gonna be hard to keep him on the floor for more than 10-15 minutes a game, which is unfortunate because he's the wing that needs to come in and be able to relieve guys like MPJ and Aaron Gordon. And then at the backup 5, you have DeAndre Jordan, who I don't see it, like I just don't see the value. I don't think he's gonna be able to stay on the floor in the playoffs as well for very long. So I think Aaron Gordon and Jokic are gonna have to do a lot of the center minutes, rotating back and forth. I think you maybe take Aaron Gordon out of the game early, 5 minutes into the first quarter, and then Jokic sits down for his rest and you put him back in and they rotate at the 5. But to me, that's counterproductive because, Jokic and Gordon are such a dynamic duo that they complement each other so well. So staggering their minutes isn't the best option. I think if you're going to run DeAndre Jordan at the 5, it's going to be maybe even worse than staggering those minutes. So not a lot of options at the 5. I think that's going to be a real issue for Denver. So like I said, you have Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Reggie Jackson, Justin Holiday is another guy that provides decent enough enough production for that second unit from the wing position. He's played pretty well for them this season. Can knock down a 3, good catch and shoot guy, 3 and D guy, right? But a lot of really, really great teams can run a 9-man rotation super effectively in the playoffs. That's usually how it works. Once it's like 8-man rotation and you're really limited positionally, like Reggie Jackson is just a point guard. He wouldn't really be able to play the 2 in my opinion. Yeah, maybe with Jamal Murray on the floor he could, but I don't love it. And then Christian Brown, more of a guard wing kind of hybrid, and then Peyton Watson, forward wing kind of guy. Like I said, the backup 5 for me is the biggest issue for Denver. I don't think it's going to be a big enough issue if they play their best and you get consistent production from a KCP, MPJ. But I think in, games where like MPJ is not shooting well, KCP is not shooting well. Again, these are elite shooters, right? And KCP, elite 2-way player and role player, one of the best role players in the league, in my opinion. Those guys aren't hitting their shots. Like, you don't have anyone to, supplement the lineup to rely on. So I just think that's going to be a real issue for Denver. An 8-man rotation, like I said, isn't the end of the world if the 3 guys in the second unit are super, super reliable and versatile. But when you have to stagger Gordon and Jokic, I don't know if it's going to have the same punch as it did last year when you had a backup 5 and all these guys off the bench that could come in and contribute and get you buckets and get stops. Like, I just think there could be, like I said, a lot of games where the starting 5 has to play 40 minutes, all of them are going to have to play like 40 minutes or close to it. Like I said, Jokic going to have to play 40 minutes a game, Gordon 40, MPJ, Murray, like these guys are all going to have to play so much that I feel like by the time the Western Conference finals roll around, you're going to be so tired. And like, not even that, considering that they, played all the way up to the finals last year, and that's a lot of basketball to be playing. So I just think the depth could be a real issue for them. You have guys like Julian Strother and Jalen Pickett, and like I said, DeAndre Jordan, Zeke Naji, I believe. So these are guys that, like, I'm not sure Mike Malone would trust in a playoff series to come in and hold down the fort while your core is on the bench. So I think there's going to be a lot, Mike Malone's going to have to get really creative with the staggering and how he adjusts the lineups on the fly game to game. Like I said, if those 5 guys aren't playing their best, like even if a couple of them have a bad night, it's going to be a really hard time for Jokic and Murray to try to overcome that. Luckily, I think Jokic and Murray are good enough and great enough to be able to overcome that issue of depth. Like, they're just so good, and Jokic is just so great that I just think they're probably going to make it out of the West regardless. But I do think that can be exploited in the playoffs. I do think they're going to get super taxed and fatigued by the time like a Western Conference finals roll around. But like I said, I think younger teams with deeper rotations are going to really be an issue for Denver, like a Minnesota, like an OKC, because these guys have fresh legs. They weren't playing all the way up to the finals last year. They're not having to play 45 minutes a game. And I'm not saying, these guys are going to play 45 minutes, but like, they might have to in a game 7. Are you taking Jokic off the floor for 8 minutes? I'm not sure. Besides that, you really only have a few ball handlers besides Murray and Reggie Jackson that you can even like trust in those situations. Jokic can handle the ball a little bit, but let's say Reggie Jackson is in a shooting slump and can't make a shot that night, or he's getting exploited on defense or whatever it is, and then okay, like, you're in trouble now. I just think Christian Brown's gonna have to play again like probably 40 minutes because he's the most reliable on that second unit, I think, for the most part. And if I'm Mike Malone and I'm looking at this roster, I'm saying this is the guy I can trust most of the time. But it's going to be really, really tough for Denver in those final rounds, I think, to be able to have the legs to compete with some of these younger teams, especially in like transition. And I'm not trying to disrespect some of these bench players, but I just think there's certain things that happen in the playoffs and certain matchups that work throughout the regular season, and then once you get to the playoffs, they just start getting exploited possession after possession, and your issues kind of are your issues by the time that rolls around. So like I said, I think Murray and especially Jokic, they're just great enough to overcome that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if Jokic plays like he did last year in the playoffs, one of the greatest playoff runs we've ever seen in NBA history by far. I think it's a real possibility that they just overcome all of that, but they're gonna need that level of play from him. Like, he's really gonna have to level up like he did last year to get past some of these teams. And I think the West is, again, super tough, but I also think, luckily for Denver, a lot of those teams aren't necessarily ready to beat a Denver Nuggets squad with the best player in the world in a 7-game series. I just don't think they're as complete and experienced and just there yet in their timeline. Like OKC, I think, is a really, really great team, but I just, again, Jokic is Jokic. I just think he clears a lot of those matchups, unfortunately. And like I said, the team I like the most against Denver would be Minnesota, probably, if Cat's healthy, because you have a defensive mindset that's, these guys are dogs. You got Rudy Gobert, who is probably, if we're really thinking about it, who's a better matchup for Jokic other than Gobert? Then you have Towns, who can spread the floor offensively. If he's healthy, he's going to make a lot of those offensive possessions for Minnesota really, really easy. Guys like Anthony Anthony Edwards to be able to get to the paint whenever he wants, drive and kick type stuff. And then you have versatile defenders like Jaden McDaniels, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and then you have Mike Conley to set the table and be all reliable at the point guard. So I think Minnesota is probably best geared for a Denver matchup. And they even gave Denver a tough series last year, if you guys remember, in the first round of the playoffs. They made it out of that play-in tournament, gave Denver maybe the toughest series of anyone in the playoffs other than maybe Phoenix, right? But Minnesota is twice as good as they were last year. They have the best defense in the NBA, in my opinion, and they have the offensive firepower when their players are at their best to be able to, complement that defense with just enough offense to be able to get past a team like Denver. So I think it's gonna be really interesting what happens with Denver in the playoffs. I do think the depth is going to come back and bite them at some point. Whether or not Jokic is great enough to not have that ruin their season, that is a real possibility as well. I do think it's going to be Denver-Boston in the finals. We'll have to see, but I do think that's the most likely outcome. Of course, there's other scenarios that could easily happen that I could see happening. I wouldn't be shocked, but as it sits, I think it's Denver-Boston. I think that'd be a great series, by the way. Love it to be my Sixers. Imagine an Embiid-Jokic finals series. That would be the greatest thing of all time. But anyways, let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about the Nuggets. Like, I just don't know if I'm making too much of a big deal out of this depth situation, but do you think an 8-man rotation with a lot of older players that maybe lack some athleticism and versatility on defense and positionally could be an issue for Denver? Do you think the backup 5 is as big of an issue as I'm making it, or do you think Jokic just clears anyway because he's Jokic? Because that, again, I would tend to agree with that most of the time. So it's just going to depend on matchups and who they get in these rounds and stuff like that. So either way, make sure you guys drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Really mean a lot to me. Thank you guys for all the support. Really appreciate you. We're going to be trying to upload every day. The playoffs coming up, and during the playoffs, we're going to be trying to upload every day. It's going to be a great time of year for this channel, and I just love basketball, man. What can I say? Hopefully you guys have a fantastic rest of your day today, and hopefully your favorite team wins their next NBA game, and hopefully your favorite team can overcome the lack of depth that they have in their rotation and repeat as NBA champions. I will catch you guys in the next one. This is your boy D-Haven. As always, peace.